it is getting colder and colder and colder. And I have spoke about and thought about, and I'm going to keep this hair at least until spring. So come spring, we will have an episode on Papa Ben's Vlogs where we go ahead and get this all cut off and get it sent out to Locks of Love. I'm trying kind of this new thing with the beard. I kind of like it, where it's just kind of my Welsh chin here is just kind of covered in hair. Kind of like how that looks. Anyway, let me know kind of down below how you guys think of the beard. Not of the hair, but of the beard. Anyway, we have Les Mis here. We are on book 1 of Fantine in this series. And we are also on chapter 11. And it is getting cold out here. But anyway, let's go ahead and get into chapter 11. It would be quite wrong to suppose from this that Monsignor Bennevue was a philosopher bishop, or a patriot cure. His meeting, which we might also call his communion with the conventionalist G, left him somewhat stunned and made him still more charitable. That was all. Although Monsignor Bennevue was anything but a politician, we ought perhaps to indicate here briefly his position regarding the events of the day, if indeed Monsignor Bennevue ever consciously adopted a position, for we must go back a few years. Sometime after M. Muriel became a bishop, the emperor made him a baron of the empire, along with several other bishops. The arrest of the people took place, as we know, on the night of July 5th, 1809. On that occasion, M. Muriel was called by Napoleon to the Synod of the Bishops of France and Italy convened in Paris. The Synod was held at Notre Dame, beginning its sessions on June 15th, 1811, under the presidency of Cardinal Fesch. M. Muriel was one of the 95 bishops present, but he attended only one session and 3 or 4 private conferences. Bishop of the mountain diocese, living so close to nature in rustic conditions, a privation, he seemed to bring these eminent personages ideas that change with the tone of the synod. He returned early to Denis. When asked about this sudden return, he answered, "I annoyed them. The mountain air came in with me. I had the effect of an open door." Another time he said, "What do you expect? Those prelates are princes. I am only a poor peasant bishop." The fact is that he had offended them. Among other strange things, he had dropped the remark one evening when he happened to be at the house of one of his highest-ranking colleagues. "What fine clocks, fine carpets, fine liveries! It must all be very bothersome. How I loathe would be to have all these superfluities forever crying in my ears. There are people who are starving. There are people who are cold. What about the poor? What about the poor?" We should say, by the way, that the hatred of luxury is not an intelligent hatred. That would imply a hatred of the arts. Nevertheless, among churchmen, if taken beyond their rituals and ceremonies, luxury is a fault. It appears to indicate habits that are not truly charitable. A wealthy priest is a contradiction. He ought to stay close to the poor. But who can be in continual contact, night and day, with every distress, every misfortune and privation, without picking up a little of that holy poverty? like the dust of labor. Can you imagine a man near a fire who does not feel warm? Can you imagine a laborer working constantly at a furnace who has not one hair singed, nor a nail blackened, nor a drop of sweat, nor a speck of ashes on his face? The first proof of charity in a priest, and especially a bishop, is poverty. That is undoubtedly what the Bishop of Denis believed. It must not be thought, however, that in some delicate matters he shared what could be called the ideas of age. He had little to do with the theological quarrels of the moment, and kept his peace on questions where church and state were compromised. But if hard-pressed, he would have proved more ultramontane than Gallican, because we are drawing a portrait, and want to conceal nothing. We are compelled to add that he was very cool toward Napoleon in the decline of his power. After 1813, he acquiesced in and even applauded in the hostile demonstrations. He refused to see him as he passed on his return from Elba, and declined to require in his diocese public prayers for the emperor during the 100 Days. Besides his sister, Mademoiselle Baptine, he had two brothers, one a general, the other a prefect. He wrote quite often to both. He felt a coolness toward the first, because, being in command of province at the time of the landing of Canes, the general placed himself at the head of 1,200 men and pursued the emperor as if he wished to let him escape. His correspondence was more affectionate with the other brother, the ex-prefect, a brave and worthy man who lived in retirement in Paris, on the Rue Castiet. So even Monseigneur Benevue had his hour of partisan spirit, his hour of bitterness, his clouds. The shadow of the moment's passion passed over this great and gentle soul occupied with eternal things. Certainly such a man deserved to escape political opinions. Let no one misunderstand. We do not confuse so-called political opinions with that great yearning for progress, with that sublime, patriotic, democratic, and human faith which, in our days, should be the basis of all generous thought, without going further into questions that have only an indirect bearing on the subject of this book. We would simply say, it would have been better if Monseigneur Bienvenu had not been a royalist, and if his eyes had never been averted for a single instant from that serene contemplation steadily shining above the conflicts of human affairs, in which are seen those three pure luminaries, truth, justice, and charity. Although we contended that it was not for a political function that God created Monseigneur Bienvenu, we could have understood and admired a protest in the name of law and liberty, a fierce opposition, a perilous and just resistance to Napoleon when he was all-powerful. But what pleasures us in those who are rising is less pleasing in those who are falling. We do not admire the combat when there is no danger, and in any case, the combats of that first hour alone have the right to be the exterminators in the last. He who has not been a determined accuser during prosperity should hold his peace in adversary. He alone who denounces the success as a right to proclaim the justice of the downfall has for ourselves, when Providence intervenes and strikes the blow, we take no part. 1812 began to disarm us. In 1813, the cowardly breach of the silence on the part of that Trucian legislative body, emboldened by catastrophe, deserved more than indignation, and it was a base to applaud it. In 1814, seeing those traitorous marshals, seeing that Senate passing from one gutter to the next, insulting what they had defied, seeing that idolatry recoiling and spitting upon its idol. It was a duty to turn away in disgust. In 1815, when the air was filled with final disasters, when France felt the thrill of the sinister approach, when Waterloo could already be dimly perceived opening in front of Napoleon, the sad acclamations of the army and people to the man condemned by destiny were not proper subjects for laughter, and having every possible reservation about the depot, a heart like that of Bishop Denis ought not perhaps to have refused to see what was noble and touching, on the brink of the abyss, in the final embrace of that great nation and a great man. To conclude, he was always, in all things, just, true, fair, intelligent, humble, worthy, beneficent, and benevolent, which is another benefice. He was a priest, a sage, and a man. We must even say that in those political opinions that we have been criticizing and that we are disposed to judge almost severely, he was tolerant and yielding, perhaps more than we who now speak. To take an example, the doorkeeper of the city hall had been placed there by the emperor. He was an old subaltern officer of the Old Guard, a legionnaire of Austerlitz, and as staunch and Bonapartist as an eagle. This poor fellow sometimes thoughtlessly allowed words to escape him that the law at that time defined as seditions. Since the profile of the emperor had disappeared from the Legion of Honor, he never dressed in regulation uniform, so that he might not be forced, as he would say, to bear his cross. He had devotedly removed the imperial effigy of the cross that Napoleon had given him. It left a hole, and he would put nothing in its place. Better die, he said, than wear the 3 toads over my heart. He was always railing loudly at Louis the 17th. Old gouty foot with his English spats, he would say. Let him go to Persia with his Whig tail, happily uniting in the same insult the 2 things he most hated, Prussia and England. He said so much that he lost his job. There he was, without bread, and in the street with his wife and children. The bishop sent for him, scolded him a little, and made him doorkeeper at the cathedral. In the diocese, M. Muriel was the true pastor, the friend of all. In 9 years, by dint of holy works and gentle manners, Monseigneur Bienvenu had filled the city of Denis with a kind of tender and filial veneration. Even his conduct toward Napoleon had been accepted and pardoned in silence by the people, a good, meek flock who adored their emperor, but loved their bishop. Sorry about that, guys. There was a lot of interesting French words in there. But that was kind of interesting to be able to see kind of a different sort of view on the bishop there. Anyway, what are your thoughts and comments on that? You guys all have a wonderful, blessed day, and I'll see you next time.